On the teams he played on, Ted Kennedy was rarely the most talented player. He had to work for every inch of ice he got. No NHL player exhibited the character it takes to be a great captain more than this great Leaf. Kennedy was acquired from Montreal in 1943, and when the Leafs were dominant, winning 5 cup titles in the late 40s and early 50s, Kennedy was their most consistent force. He was named captain in 1948, succeeding his mentor Syl Apps, and he led the team in every way possible. He worked the hardest. He respected the franchise and the sweater. He took every important face-off, and his competitive level was unmatched. Kennedy remained as captain until his first retirement in 1955. Then, when he made his comeback 2 years later, the C once again adorned his chest.
Kennedy, and in beside me here, his son Mark Kennedy. In beside me here, Jim Morrison, a former teammate of his with the Maple Leafs for 6 seasons. Mark, we'll begin with you, and I find it amazing that Ted never got to know his dad, who was killed 2 weeks prior to his birth. Where did his leadership skills come from growing up in Port Colborne?
His leadership skills came from his mother, who was the most remarkable woman. And I once asked him when he was quite old who his hero was growing up, and he said, my mother. And she raised a family of 5 children by turning her house into a restaurant and working the concessions at the local hockey arena in the evening. And after the crowds had left, Dad and his brothers would get out and play shinny. And I think that had something to do with his hockey skills. But she was a determined woman, a woman of real character, and one that grandchildren still look up to.
What a legacy you've just mentioned right there. Jim, we look back at his legacy as a hockey player, not known as one of the better skaters, but in 1966 he goes into the Hall of Fame for a variety of reasons. What would they have been?
I would say leadership is probably up at the top of the board, and you talk about dedication and perseverance to play. He'd be a good example for somebody that's just coming up in the ranks and doesn't know whether they're going to be able to make it or not. He just made himself make it, and that's the type of player he was. He led by example, basically.
Jim, great to see you again. Mark Kennedy, great to see you and meet you for the first time on a great night on behalf of your dad. Let's go upstairs to Joe and Greg.
Well, thanks very much, Paul, and a great ceremony prior to the game with Ted Kennedy, who arrived on the scene before television really got going, although we in our archives have been able to come up with the last game that Ted Kennedy played, and maybe even his last shift, March 16, 1957. This is his last shift. Watch for number 9 right there on the side of the net, and blue uniform, and there he is, Ted Kennedy. He would leave after this game, and a young man by the name of Frank Mahovlich would arrive on the scene, but wearing number 26 in his first NHL game. Great archives.
It's incredible to watch the old footage, and every time I see it, I get such an appreciation for the game then and how the game has changed today. And I think it's really important, particularly when we're all involved with the Maple Leaf organization, that we do look back at the tradition of this franchise, because it's rich, and there's been some fantastic memories in this market for a lot of years.
I can remember listening to how great Ted Kennedy was because it was on a radio with Foster Hewitt.
You're a little older than I am, Joe.
I was about 5 or 6 years of age when I was doing it, but I do remember my dad talking glowingly, having seen Ted Kennedy play live a couple of times.
I wish I could have. I was the Johnny Bauer, David Keon era. Well, you know, I was just being born when he was retiring.
Yeah, exactly. Let's
Sorry,
go back
Joe.
downstairs to Paul.